So the big question is this. We know spontaneous remissions and so-called miracle cures exist. We also know they aren't so spontaneous after all. I'm living proof of this, having cured my quote-unquote incurable illness. There's something to how this happens. So how do we, as humans with chronic symptoms, tap into this so-called miraculous healing capacity? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Dr. Erin Hayford, and welcome to the Sacred Illness Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, just my standard medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The content should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical concerns. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. I'm very excited today. I have an incredible guest with me, James Wright from north of Tampa, Florida, here in the United States. This is the very first time I've interviewed someone on this podcast who is healing from ALS, which stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is more commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. I think most of us know that Lou Gehrig's disease is one that is thought of to be terminal. And I was pulling up some details on it this morning before the podcast just to refresh my own knowledge. And the first thing you'll see when you research it, it says it's a irreversible deadly motor neuron disease. And James is here 11 years after his diagnosis, which is more than twice the life expectancy he was given. So he's already beat the odds by 6 years at least. And so obviously today is going to be a really incredible conversation. He has a book, he has a website. There's a lot of things I'm going to share with you that you can look more into at the end of this podcast after our conversation. But let's welcome James to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Erin. I appreciate being on your platform and sharing my story so that it can inspire, uplift, and motivate people to think about different ways that they can apply healing into their life or their situation.
I'm very excited to get into everything you are doing and have done and your thought process and what you've learned. So wherever you want to start us off, wherever the story begins, I'd love to hear how this has played out for you.
All right, I'm going to call this part The Body Whispers Before It Screams. So I had recently been married, maybe 2 years into my marriage. I would have these night tremors where I would be shaking in bed and my wife would wake me up and say, like, honey, are you all right? And that was my body whispering that something was wrong. 2 years later, the night tremors stopped. And then I started having cramps in my hand when I was working. And I thought that initially it was because I was working on my computer and maybe doing something ergonomically incorrect. So I spent 2 years going to a physical therapist and a hand doctor trying to find out what's wrong with my hands. And my hands weren't getting better at all. So I stopped going to them. My wife went to a doctor for an annual checkup. And she told that doctor that, my husband's been having some balance issues. Like, when people would shake my hand or coming down the stairs of my house, my balance was a little off. That was the disease progressing. I played the game pickup football with some guys in my neighborhood, and I was running top speed. I mean, I hadn't ran that fast since I was a kid. And I was running, and then all of a sudden my leg missed a step, and I fell down, and I burnt out in the grass. And the guy was like, I didn't touch him. I mean, it looked pretty bad. And so that's when I kind of knew that something was wrong. The third thing was we were on vacation in Martha's Vineyard, and my wife and I were doing a morning jog. And during that jog, my foot, I think they call it drop foot. My foot caught the gravel and I fell down. When we got back to the house where we were doing an Airbnb with some other professionals. There was a dentist who was there. And I was laying on the porch talking about how tired I was and how I couldn't get my energy. And the doctor looked at me, the dentist said, well, it sounds like there's something going on, but she didn't say anymore, being that she was a dentist, not a doctor. So my wife's doctor recommended that I go to a clinic in Philadelphia area because that's where we lived at the time. They did all these tests, and after a week or so, they called me back for the results. They said, you're diagnosed with ALS. And the doctor was like, well, listen, do you understand what I'm saying to you? He thought I was in shock. And he said, James, usually people have 3 to 5 years from the time that we give them a diagnosis. And he said, are you okay? And meanwhile, my wife was working in New York and she couldn't be there in person. So she was on the phone on speaker. And I could hear her being really, really quiet. And then I responded to the doctor and I said, well, listen, I understand what you're saying, but I don't receive your diagnosis.
Mm.
From the very beginning, my mindset was, I get what you're saying as a professional, and that is what you have to tell me. But I'm telling you, the way I've lived my life, mind over matter, I just don't receive that diagnosis. And he was really concerned because he thought I was more cavalier about receiving such bad news. But for me, I've always thought my glass is half full. So if you give me what others would consider to be bad news, I'm going to look at it like, okay, well, what's the upside to this news? It's bad inherently, and there's nothing that we can do about that. So let's figure out what we can do, what we do have. And that was how I started this journey.
Wow. That's incredible. That's always my big first question for folks, which is when was it that the flip switched where you decided this isn't my fate or this isn't the path I'm going to follow? And for some people, it comes after years and years of trial and error and tests and failed treatments. But obviously for you, you didn't have that luxury because you had 3 to 5 years, according to the doctor. But it sounds like immediately for you, it was just this, I get what you're saying, but this isn't what my life is going to be. I don't accept the diagnosis, essentially. There was just that inner knowing in you. How would you describe that? How were you thinking of the illness at that point?
I grew up as a very determined kid. My mother always told me that I can do anything I put my mind into, and I can be anything that I wanted to be. So if you take that bit of advice from my mother, which she said over and over again in my life, so much that I just believed what she said, and then you tie it to my exposure to the church as a child. I very early started living a life where I would set a goal, I would believe that I could do it, and then I would be so focused on that goal that I would see it through. So that foundation is what I came into the doctor's office already knowing. And not to mention, I grew up in an inner city environment. If you knew my full background, there were a lot of places where I wasn't supposed to make it out, but I did. And I kept making it out over and over and over. And so I knew that your mind and your will are very powerful tools. And that if you make up in your mind that something's going to be a certain way, and then you are determined to proceed in that direction, then you don't let anything hold you back. You don't let anything stop you. And so that's how I came to the doctor's office with that perspective. Some people who have been diagnosed with a chronic illness, they might say, well, James, You had an unfair advantage. And they might be right, but I'm going to take my unfair advantage and share it with you so that you have an unfair advantage. And that from the very beginning, from wherever you are, you can start right now and change your perspective on your situation and not let it run you, and you can determine the life that you want to have.
Absolutely. I've had a few messages recently from folks who are just finding my work, and they are asking, I know that I have a lot of things my body is carrying, and how can I be preventative in having illness form when I know I have a stressful life or I have a traumatic past or whatever it is. And this is what you're speaking to, is this idea of you can become mindful of your mindset, how you're thinking of yourself, what you think is possible, what you think you are capable of, and what you think life is about. And I think the unfair advantage, so to speak, that you had is that you had it from day one. It got programmed into you from your mom, and you had a lifetime of experience that told you, if I have this mindset, I can literally get through anything. Like you said, you had so many experiences prior to this diagnosis where they were challenging situations, and yet you got through them. And so you had that evidence in your mind and body already saying, this is true. If I believe in myself and if I apply myself and I keep trying, I will find my way through. And so this illness presents itself as the ultimate challenge. But to you, it was just like any other challenge. Like, okay, I know how to get through this. I know the mindset. I know the approach. I know what I need to do and who I need to be. And so far, this has proven correct. And tell us about that part. You get the diagnosis. What happens from there?
Well, given that they gave me 3 to 5 years to live, I always believe God's word that says that I will have the fullness of my days. So I've always envisioned having a wife and having children, growing old. I think most people have those kind of thoughts about living and about their life. But I also knew that with this challenge, it was a little bit different than goals that I had in the past. And so I told a very few number of people about the diagnosis initially. I say initially, I mean, I didn't tell people for about 3 years. And in that time frame, my body continued to digress. I was no longer able to swim or hike or do a lot of the physical activities that I really enjoy, but I was still able to walk and do other things. I took that 3 years and I fortified my mind. When a doctor tells you that you have 3 to 5 years to live, you're suddenly faced with your mortality.
Yeah.
You're thinking about all the things in life that you didn't have a chance to do. Why me? This is so unfair. A lot of times when you're given a terminal diagnosis and you share it with people, they will look at you with this pitiful look, like you're a sad case. And then sometimes people say stupid stuff. And what I mean by that is people mean well, but they say things that create an image on the inside of you that makes you think that you're going to die. I think the most important thing a person can do who has been diagnosed with a terminal illness or a condition is to get an image on the inside of you that says, I'm going to live. Whether you have a purpose that you're pursuing, whether you have people that you got to live for, events that have not happened that you're still expecting to enjoy. Get that image on the inside of you so strong that when people say stupid stuff, that image cannot be penetrated because it's that image that will plant a seed of doubt in your life and in your mind. And then that doubt will allow negative images to come. So I spent time fortifying my mind with daily affirmations, daily scriptures, anything that I could think of. Whenever I would have a negative thought, I would immediately start saying those things in my mind in the middle of the night. When I'm driving my car in the middle of a conversation, I literally would say the affirmations to fortify my mind against any negative thoughts, any negative images. And that's important because if you let those images seep into your consciousness, then it's a wrap.
That's powerful and so important that people, no pun intended, really wrap their mind around that concept, because
Yeah.
there are studies that show if a doctor says you have 3 to 5 years and you believe it, it almost reinforces why we have these prognoses, because we give a prognosis to a patient and then the patient believes it and then they become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it reinforces this story of when you get this diagnosis, this is what happens. It's so necessary for us to start shifting this paradigm of saying, this is the diagnosis, anything can happen. Choose your own adventure. What mindset do you want to have around this? What outcome do you think you're going to have? I know that doctors have to cover their ass all the time and it's always about not getting sued, but there's real detriment in the medical field when we don't allow there to be hope and belief in something different. And I've shared this story before, but I gave birth to my second son in June of last year. And same thing, I had this mindset. I love what you said, get an image so strong in your mind that nothing can change what it is. I had this image of having a pain-free, easy birth, and it was exactly that. It was 99.9% pain-free, which is not the norm, right? That's not the story that we're told. We're told like women are screaming and it's horrible, and that's why we have to anesthetize ourselves from the waist down. And the other part of it that was important was that I had to not allow other people to tell me their birth story, because as you're saying, those stories get in your head. Like, oh my God, I had to go to the emergency room for an emergency C-section, or it was so painful, I tore. All these things that if people get in your head, it can start to become your story if you are susceptible to it. And so I think that's so key for folks to understand that. And it's not about hiding it or not being real about what's happening to you. It's about getting real for yourself. What is my story? What's my outcome going to be? And not letting other people's experiences and fears and projections to infiltrate that and change that, because that's them. That doesn't have to be you. You get to choose your narrative.
That Aaron, you hit the nail on the head. Healing starts in your mind first, and you can't let someone else's story become your story. You write your own story. What do you want? How do you expect to live? And then you figure out, what's my game plan? And for you, you had a thought of having a stress-free, problem-free delivery, and it was exactly that. And so this is the power of healing that I'm talking about in the book. And really, it's what drew me to your website, because you talk about mind and body connection and how that works. And I like to tell people, if you don't think your mind is powerful, do this one simple experiment. Say something really positive about yourself. Say it 7 times. Say it aloud. And then every time you say it, get louder and louder and see how you feel after you say it the 7th time. And usually people are like, wow, you know what? I do really feel good about that. Or I do really feel good about myself. That is letting you know that your mind has power. That's untapped potential.
Yes, I love that. And something that was really eye-opening for me was this idea of seeing to believe. If we are told something or if we are exposed to something over and over, we start to believe that that is reality and that is truth. And the example I was reading about was, you look at folks who grew up with a partner and kids and a house and a car. It's typical for us to replicate that in our lives because we believe it's possible. It's possible to have a partner and kids and a house and a car. Whereas folks who had one parent or didn't have a car, or there was inconsistent income or whatever, there tends to be this replication unless you overcome it somehow, unless you change your mindset. And we have so many stories of that where people will tell that story of, I came from this and I had to overcome it by changing my mindset and believing a different story. And it's one of those things where we read these stories and see these examples and we're like, oh, what a beautiful story. But we don't actually think, what does that actually mean? How do I actually apply that to my life? Because obviously something is happening there. It's not just luck. They made a conscious decision to write a different narrative for themselves and not just replicate the story that they grew up believing was what life was all about. And so before we hit record on the podcast today, you were saying you are still doing a lot of activities that are keeping your body healthy and active. So it sounds like you spent 3 years fortifying your mindset. What was the next step from there?
Yeah, I was always a physically active person, but one of the things that happens early on in ALS diagnosis is that for that first 2 years of your diagnosis, you are in a period where you can participate in special research programs like drug trials to see how that drug might impact someone in that specific time frame of the illness. And one of the things I got drafted into was a stretching program for 6 months. Well, being an athlete in my youth, I was no stranger to the benefits of stretching. But in ALS, when your body is starting to lose mobility and range of motion, stretching becomes a very valuable activity that will help you maintain your range of motion. So that was one thing. Secondly, when I got diagnosed, I was planning on opening a day spa. And I decided, well, I'm still going to go ahead and do that because I was already planning on doing it. And just because I got a diagnosis, it didn't mean that I had to stop my plans for my life.
Right.
So I was going to keep living the way that I planned on living. So I used massage therapy as another means to help keep my body in a way where my muscles were receiving a proper blood flow. And I was doing it maybe once a week, maybe twice a week. But because I owned the spa, I had the ability to do that. Some people may not have the resources to do that. So then I found out about something called Thai massage because eventually there are some stretches that I couldn't do on my own. And Thai massage is the kind of massage where the person uses their body to stretch your body. And so I was doing that for a while. And some kind of way I came across a chiropractor. And the chiropractor was talking about how when your body is in perfect alignment, your brain can communicate down your spinal cord to your nerve endings. And then your body can operate in more of an optimal fashion. So initially, I was doing the stretching from the research program. I was getting massages, and then I was going to the chiropractor twice a week, getting an adjustment, which helped me with my walking, it helped me with just my overall health. And then I tried medical marijuana. One of my wife's friends came over to the house, and he had been going through cancer treatments, and the medical marijuana he was using really helped ease his pain. As I'm talking right now, my voice is rather rasping, and I would have bouts of that early on. When I started doing medical marijuana, my voice started to sound clearer.
Mm.
I started to be able to sleep better at night. I had less pain in my body. So over the course of the journey, I've tried a lot of different things, and some things work for me better in the beginning, and then maybe they don't work as well now, and other things are working better now. Stretching works for me wonders, and I do it every week for an hour with a person, and then I do it on my own daily. There are a lot of natural things that promote the body's natural healing processes, eating better, cutting out processed foods, drinking more natural juices and juicing. And those are all things that I've done. Eating more salads. Give your body a fighting chance. Nutrients it needs so they can do what it was already designed to do.
Yes, I love that. In naturopathic medicine, we refer to it as removing the obstacles to cure, which is what you're saying. Get everything out of the way that could potentially be blocking your body from doing what it's designed to do, which is to be healthy and to be at a certain baseline. And that baseline
Yeah.
looks different for every person. But when you get sick, it's obvious, like, okay, that was my baseline and now this illness is not my baseline. So how do I get back to what it was or close to that again? And so, yeah, it's looking at all the things of, yeah, is my spine aligned? What am I eating? But I think the piece that is often overlooked, which is the winning combination, is putting mindset in addition to those things. Because oftentimes when we think about healing, we are doing all those modalities that you just mentioned, and we're not necessarily working on the mindset piece. And that has to be part of it, because if you're eating salad every day, but thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die, that's probably not going to get you very far.
Yeah. You know, I still say daily affirmations today. When my kids were 3 and 5 years old, when they were really young, I taught them to say an affirmation, and they still say it today. My kids are 13 and 15, and the daily affirmation for them as a child was, today something good is going to happen to me. Amen. Very simple. Today something good is going to happen to me. So my mom told me I could do anything. I got them expecting that every day something good is going to happen to them. That mental piece is extremely important because the mind and the body have to be united. If one is disconnected, then the other one won't work.
Exactly. That's it. That's the simplest way to say it. Our mind and our body are a team. They work together. And if
Yeah.
one is functioning well, but the other is not, then there's a problem and it's going to catch up to you. I love the affirmation you gave to your kids. That's a gift you gave to all of us too. If we can have that mindset of expectation, because that's what it comes down to. What are you expecting? Because whatever you're expecting is what your body is priming you for and sending signals out and bracing for whatever bad thing we're thinking over and over is going to happen. Or if we're expecting goodness, then your body is becoming primed for that and getting ready for that. And even from a straightforward physiological perspective, if we're constantly like, oh God, what's going to happen today? If we're just like waiting for the shoe to drop, then our body is primed in a stressful way. We're flooding our system with cortisol, and obviously that's not good for us. It's shifting our physiology, putting us into a state where healing can't occur. It's going back to what you were saying, where you are doing everything you can to remove those obstacles so that your body can be in a state where healing can happen. And again, the mindset has to be part of that. If you're doing the physical things, but then flooding your system with cortisol because you're thinking stressful thoughts or expecting the worst, then your body can't receive the goodness that you're giving it through food and exercise because it's physiologically shifted into a place of disease. So when
Yep.
you pair the two and you're saying, today something good is going to happen to me, your body is open to receiving goodness, including the food and
Yeah.
exercise.
Yes, I have two things that I like to think about. One is I always tell people, do what makes you feel good. Like, you know, there is a chemical process when endorphins are happening in your body. So when you are diagnosed with a chronic illness or addiction, find something that brings you joy and makes you feel good. Because when you're feeling good, it's easier to live in a state of expectation about good things continuing to happen to you. And then another quote that I like to use is, expectation that cannot be killed is expectation that cannot be denied. And that will work for you whether you expect something negative or positive. So when you were talking about living in expectation, I was like, yo, Dr. Aaron is in my mind. Why are you,
Yes.
why are you all in my mind? I love it. I love it.
That's awesome. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, but that's it, right? It comes down to that exactly. And like you said, it can be for better or for worse. If you're expecting
Yeah.
it and nothing can interfere with that expectation, then it's inevitable. Things are in motion to make that happen. And I'm curious too, you mentioned you are a man of faith, and it sounds like that has played a big role in your recovery process as well. And I'm wondering, was there anything in particular how that supported you, or was it more the belief of, okay, this is in my path for a reason? How does that play into it? Because I think that's a key piece too.
Yeah, so I found every scripture that I could think of and everything that talked about healing in my body. And I learned those scriptures and I committed them to memory so that when I would have a negative thought, I could quote God's promise of healing for my body. And that was very important for me on this journey. Now, if a person doesn't believe in God, we've been talking about things that will work universally, whether you believe in God or not. I choose to believe in God, but our bodies are designed in such a way that universally, some things just will work whether you believe or not. If you believe in the ability of those things to work, they will work for you. By reading my Bible, I've discovered these promises and I apply them to my life every single day so that I'm expecting to be healed. There's a scripture that says, the same spirit that raised up Jesus from the dead, that spirit dwells in you, then it will heal your mortal body. There's a scripture that says, by his stripes I am healed. There's a scripture that says, I will live and not die and declare the works of the Lord. So these are things that I fortify my mind with. When you have a chronic diagnosis, you got to have chronic faith. So the same way that diagnosis is opposing your body, you have to have the same chronic tenacity to combat that situation in your mind and spirit so that your body will follow. For me, I give God the glory and the foundation of how I learned to apply my mental, physical, and spiritual abilities in one so that it will help heal my body.
And that's important. The mindset piece and the expectations, those are universal, whether it's linked to spirituality or not. And I think having that bigger perspective and a belief system, a bigger cosmos to plug this all into can be that much more helpful because it gives it more meaning and support when it's not just me fighting this. There's more of a system to plug it into. There's scripture around this or ways it's been written about or talked about or things promised through my faith. So whether it's Christian faith or any sort of spiritual belief, I think if that bigger perspective is there, it's more supportive of saying, it's not just me. There's support here and there's messages here. And some might even say there's reason for it. There's a reason this is in my life. And I'm curious about that for you, because that can be a sticky point for folks to feel like illness came for a reason. I wonder if you see it as just a hurdle to overcome, something for you to grow through, or do you feel that your illness has had some sort of purpose in your life?
Dr. Aaron, that's a good question. Before I answer that, let me say one more thing about spirituality.
Yeah.
The important thing about your mind, body, and spirit connection is also community. It's important to have community where people are on your team and believing in your ability to be healed. My faith in God provides me with a community where what I believe is being reinforced from the people who I'm around. Now, to answer your question about the purpose of this disease, I don't believe there are any accidents. There are no coincidences. Things happen to you for a reason. And so, yes, I believe this happened to me for a reason. And for me, the reason is that I would show God's goodness and glory, find Him through whatever challenges I might have. I had two brothers that I grew up with, and they both were diagnosed with cancer. One died in 2005, and the other died in January of 2024. And then I was diagnosed with a chronic illness. It's a misfortune that so much chronic illness would happen in one family. But I believe that I have the perspective of being able to talk about, in spite of what happened to my family, in spite of what happened to me, still believe that you can live a life that's fulfilling, and don't let whatever your chronic illness is rob you of that joy, because there is a joy in living, and you had it before you were diagnosed. I'm telling you, You need to have it after you are diagnosed. So I think the purpose for me is to encourage, uplift, and motivate people to believe this for their life, that they too might have a healing, even if it's a healing of their mind and their spirit. Maybe the body won't follow, but if you're mentally healed and you're spiritually healed, that's probably going to give your body a really good chance to follow.
Yes, that's beautiful. I can't help but think that folks such as yourself, the fact that you are taking this illness and turning it into something so powerful, this message of hope and healing, like the book that you have now that you would never have written had you not had this diagnosis, and you overcoming these odds, it's just so healing to hear your words and your perspective, and it's so encouraging and inspiring. And I think that it's medicine. What you have now is medicine that you're giving to the world. And I wouldn't wish illness on anyone, but when it falls into the hands of someone such as yourself, what a gift it becomes, because not everyone has this perspective or is able to talk about illness in this way. And that's why I talk about illness as an invitation for anyone who gets sick. There's this invitation for us to engage with it in the way that you have. And obviously not everyone does, but that's the purpose of this podcast and this work, to say, there is a choice here. There's an invitation here for you to look at this and to be in relationship with it differently. That prognosis doesn't have to become your destiny. Again, if that's your expectation, you fall into line with that. But your medicine is to show people there's a different path that can be taken. It's like this next level of, wow, if he can do that, what can I do? And like we were saying at the beginning of this conversation, if I'm not even sick, if I don't even have a diagnosis, what could that mean for me if I don't have to overcome that kind of hurdle? If I just believe in myself and my potential and believe in these expectations that I have for myself, what does that look like? It just opens up so much of life, and it gets us back to the mind, body, spirit connection of how incredible being a human is, and how powerful we are, and how much potential we have for goodness and for change and for growth. And it's just such a beautiful, inspiring thing. Illness is that catalyst that shows, if we can overcome this, what is possible. The sky is truly the limit when we look at it through that lens.
Yeah, Dr. Anna, I love that about you, because I was reading on your webpage about how illness can be connected to other things, and that you have to think about illness, begin to think about it in a different way. And the way that you think about illness can be defined how the illness impacts your life. And so, that's what you're talking about. And I love that about your mission, about sacred illness and its mission to bring this awareness to people who are diagnosed with a chronic condition. I really love that about your efforts and about your mission, and about how you're going to impact the lives of so many people.
Thank you so much. And it's because of folks like you and the guests on this podcast. Part of my mission is to become a space to amplify voices and to tell stories, because I have my story, but it's more powerful when there's 20 stories, 50 stories, hundreds of stories that are being spread through this podcast. And the more voices we add to this narrative, it becomes inevitable that this is not the exception to the rule. I want these stories to become the rule. This is the new way we need to be thinking about illness. It's not this fluke. There's a pattern to all these stories. Everyone who comes on this podcast, the same thing, where there's this like, this isn't going to be my destiny. This is not going to be me. This is not my story. Yeah. And we change our mind, and we don't allow the prognosis to become our story. And again, the more voices that can speak to that rhythm and that story, this is what becomes possible with illness. And this is what we start to see as the prognosis versus this algorithmic, this disease equals this much time to live, or you're going to have surgery or take these medications forever or whatever. It becomes this open-ended book of, okay, this is physiologically what's happening in your body. You get to decide what you do with that information. And my hope is that it moves in that direction. So tell us what life is like for you now, because it sounds like you have the wife, you got kids, you have your business, you are living your life, you are meeting all these goals and dreams, you wrote your book. What else is happening for you, and what's on the horizon for you? Before we hit record, you said, I don't believe my illness is progressing. My doctors would probably say it's stalled, and you have the belief and mindset that you're continuing to heal. So tell us what that's looking like, and what's life has in store for you from here on.
What my life looks like now is I'm Daddy Uber. So I spend a lot of times driving my kids to school and soccer and track and whatever their tennis, golf activities are. But I also have devised a daily therapeutic plan for my body. So like certain days I go to the gym 3 days a week on minimum. And I'm doing cardio, I'm doing muscle toning, I'm doing things that really encourage my body to be in a good state. I go and get stretched once a week. I go and I sit in this infrared sauna 1 day a week for 30 minutes because infrared really helps regenerate on a cellular level. I go to physical therapy once a week as well because sometimes your body loses a function. It's just not as instinctive as it initially was. So I go to physical therapy once to relearn how my body is supposed to function. And then I began to practice those things that I learned on a weekly basis. So every day I built in some type of therapy or something that really promotes healing in my body so that I can continue to heal. Every other month, I talk to a mental health therapist just so that I am not missing anything about how I'm really feeling. I use them as a checkpoint to make sure that I'm not missing or feeling a way that I'm not addressing. So that's how I'm living my life today. I wrote the book. I'm expecting that this book will change people's lives, that I'll speak in churches, I'll be on more podcasts like this, that I'll be in book clubs, and that I'll have an opportunity to tell people the message that you're so valiantly ringing the bell on, and that's that, listen, you can have a different relationship with this illness, and it does not have to dictate how you live your life. You can dictate how you live your life in relation to the illness rather than the other way around. So we have our annual trip that we do as a family. We're going to South Africa next month.
Wow.
And I'm looking forward to that. I do everything that promotes healing on a daily basis. I do my daily affirmations. I stay connected spiritually. And then I'm also posting on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok every day, trying to encourage people about how to live on purpose.
That's incredible. I'm so inspired by your story and the fact that you are, again, more than twice the expectancy, 11 years post diagnosis. They gave you 3 to 5 years. And not only are you surviving, but you're living. You're not just getting by. You're doing things to keep your body healthy, but you are dad, your husband, you're James, you're living your life, you're traveling, you're having experiences, right? Like it has introduced things in your life to stay healthy, and you're keeping up
Yep.
on your mental health, your physical health. But other than that, you're living. And I think it's incredible. It's really inspiring because I don't know that I've ever heard of someone surviving ALS before. I'm trying to rack my brain if I've ever read a story about that before. I don't know that I have. To be healing something that is terminal and to be surviving it and thriving well past your prognosis is it's really a beautiful and inspiring story. I think everyone's going to walk away from this really receiving that medicine and receiving those affirmations and really thinking about how am I priming myself every single day? What am I expecting? What am I waking up and thinking my life is going to be? What am I moving toward? What's my purpose? What are my goals? What is my life? And who am I expecting to become as my life unfolds? And really allowing that to sink in that that matters. And if you're listening to this without a diagnosis or an illness, it matters. It doesn't matter if you're sick. It doesn't matter if you're healthy. No matter who you are, those things matter and they dictate how our entire life unfolds. And so I thank you so much for sharing your story, for finding me, for reaching out. And your book, let's talk about your book and how people can find you. Your book is called Anchored to Hope, Reframing Your Life After a Terminal Diagnosis. It's available on Amazon. You said you're working on getting it into Barnes & Noble. It's on several other websites, and I'll link your website down below as well. Anything else you want to share about your work or how people can get in touch with you?
I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube. They can go in and find out about me and then order the book. It's definitely on Amazon. It'll be on Audible before the end of October. If people don't like to read and they like to listen as they're cooking dinner or playing with the kids, it will be available on Audible before the end of this month. It'll be also on iBooks and Barnes& and Noble by the end of October.
Perfect. Okay. Everyone who's listening, you can see the links down below for all of that information and to follow him on social media. James, I like to wrap up my podcast episodes by asking people my signature question, which is, who is your illness inviting you to become? Who is it inviting you to become as you continue this journey?
My ALS is inviting me to become a public advocate for all chronic illness diagnosis and to let people know that our body in motion stays in motion. You can't afford the luxury of a negative thought and expectation that cannot be killed as expectation that cannot be denied. That is the message that I am championing as I write this book. And actually, I have 8 other chapters that I didn't include in this book that I will do a second book as a volume 2, and I will have that done by March of next year.
Wow.
So I'm becoming more of a public advocate for the chronically diagnosed.
That's exciting to know. I was going to say, I feel like your one book is probably just the beginning because there's so much in you and so much medicine and so much to say about this. And your journey is unfolding, right? So there's just going to be so much to share as life continues to move forward for you. So thank you, James. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. As I said, I'm just so inspired by you and your incredible story and your commitment to this work and this journey. It's really powerful. And I really appreciate you coming on this podcast to share it with people and to spread this message and this medicine. I'm excited to see how it continues to ripple out. And I'm honored to be part of your journey and to be part of your own purpose, which is to spread this message as well. So thank you for amplifying my work. And I'm grateful to be able to amplify your work. And I'm excited to see how things continue to unfold for you. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here today.
And thank you for having me on your platform. I really appreciate it. The dialogue has definitely been uplifting and invigorating.
Thanks everyone for tuning in today, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. If you find this information shared here inspirational and educational, please share it with those you think would benefit from this work. To take this work deeper yourself, check out our website, www.aurorasomatic.com, where you can explore our coaching, community, and course options. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel where new content is coming out all the time, intended to inspire, awaken, and help you deepen your relationship with yourself, your life, and your world. We'll see you next time.